Basically, cybercrime is linked to data leaks, whether it's just the leak of your credentials, banking, health information, or data as a result of ransomware. All cybercrime, to my understanding, is about data, whether it's espionage or credential theft or whatnot. So, because data is power and therefore money.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Sessions, our regular podcast exploring all things cybersecurity. I'm your host, Cyril Ortego, Principal Security Researcher at Netacea, the world's first fully agentless bot management product. These days, it seems that barely a week goes by without a data leak being reported in the news. According to Atlas VPN, 5.9 billion credentials were leaked in 2021 alone. But it's not just credentials under attack. Personal data, payment information, sensitive corporate data, and even source code are all at risk of being leaked. But how is so much data leaked so often? What do criminals do with the data once they have it? And what risk does this pose to the public? Well, to share some of her most memorable stories of data leaks and their consequences, I'm excited to be joined on this episode by our special guest, Chief Editor at CyberNews, Jurgita Lapienytė. Welcome, Jurgita. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners quickly?
Well, yeah, of course. So I'm Jurgita Lapienytė. I've been with CyberNews for nearly 3 years, and before that, I spent over a decade in business journalism. So, data leaks and hacks and breaches are what we, brief every day, and I'm really happy to talk more about it with you.
Great. And we'll get into the data leaks in just a bit, but let's start with your career journey. So how did you get into journalism and what drew you in particular to reporting on cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I've always been very curious and wanted to dig deeper. I always, had questions I couldn't find an answer to, so I wanted to ask more questions, obviously. And so this career path was only natural for me. I always wanted to report more on tech companies, also, as I said, being a business news journalist myself, right? And so digging deeper and deeper into the tech field, I came across the cybersecurity topics, found them really fascinating and also heavily underreported in the mainstream media. And so I get that this is a very technical field. So my goal here is to simplify it a bit, so that more people can understand, because it's really important and it's crucial that we understand what is at stake here, right? So I basically dived into the topic because I wanted to learn more myself and also to educate my readers and also just my family and friends, about all the risks and what we can do about our privacy, basically, on the internet.
And I think these days there's definitely a lot more coverage about data leaks, mainly in tech news, but there is growing coverage in the mainstream as well. And why do you think data leaks are so popular these days?
I'm really glad to see that leaks are being covered not only by the niche media outlets, right, but the mainstream outfits as well. Not that recent ago, that was definitely not a trend. So
Hmm.
one of the reasons might be, the cyber war and all its collateral damage, all the hacktivists joining the war on the cyber front and, going public with those leaks. So, they are of interest. Also, there have been a lot of hacks and, data leaks that impact our daily life. For example, I don't know, Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack or Optus hack in Australia, right? So it's of importance to us. Also, recently we've seen, many popular brands, and I mean B2C, so business to customer brands suffering a leak. Uber, Grand Theft Auto, Revolut, Facebook, LastPass, right? So
Hmm.
they all experienced different issues, but however, most of them they put user information at risk. And I think that it's only good, right, that those breaches, hacks, and leaks they attract more attention, because this means that there's an increased pressure on those companies to guard our data. Those leaks used to happen even before, right? This increased attention, but the fact that they are on the spotlight, I think it's good, basically. Also, there's a trend that criminals are mimicking basically legitimate corporations, especially like ransomware gangs. They are operating just like legitimate businesses, and so they have even their own sort of PR departments, right? And they are very public about their victims. They are eager to talk to journalists. They give out their, I don't know, emails or other means to contact them, so they are also being very public about it. So there's just a couple of reasons that come to my mind.
And why do you think that might be, especially with the kind of the cyber criminals becoming a lot more public? What's in it for them?
Well, sometimes they really exaggerate their claims, as we saw with lapsus, right? So I guess that journalists, especially when they are not careful enough, right, and they don't verify the information, they kind of also help them exaggerate the claims and put more pressure on those companies that are allegedly hit by ransomware. Maybe there's not that much at stake, maybe those claims are not even true, but companies might feel more pressured, especially when they get more attention from media. So I guess that's trying to put pressure on their victims, just
Right.
being public about that. And that kind of works just like a promotion for their business or an ad. And if a company sees that, okay, so I've been attacked by lapsus and these guys are serious, so I might want to pay them because this is a well-known gang and I better pay them because, I've read about them, going after big companies and corporations.
And I mean, you raised an interesting point there around the media having then to kind of verify that the claims are legitimate. As a journalist yourself, how do you typically go around doing that?
Oh, definitely. In some cases, it's very hard, and in some cases, it's impossible. But we never write about data leaks if we are not sure what's in there, or we go about it like very carefully, like, right? So just putting them as claims, because as I said, there's like so much information now from, those ransomware gangs. So you can't take every statement just for granted. So, sometimes we either take the data samples they provide or we ask for them to see whether at least some part of that information is true. Then we, of course, reached out to companies that had fallen victim, but also sometimes just reaching out to those victims, it doesn't help us much because companies tend to kind of downplay the whole attack, and it's understandable, but so sometimes it doesn't help us. So we try to look for data and then look whether that data kind of corresponds to the claims.
So let's talk about some of the data leaks you've covered, and particularly some of the more interesting ones. Have you got any examples that spring to mind?
Well, yeah, so there were definitely some interesting leaks at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, right? And so hacktivists, as I mentioned, joined the fight on the cyber front, trying to expose Russian government aid and agencies and then Russian companies, right? So there were like so many leaks, data put up there just basically for free, and everyone, and not only like niche media outlet but like mainstream outfits as well, were rushing to cover these leaks, but we always want to verify those. So I don't know, at the beginning there were some interesting ones. For example, the data leak from Russian foreign ministry, where even Putin's himself email was allegedly in the leak, and his
Right.
password, right? So that's exciting. You might want to report on that, but then you need to take it with a grain of salt. And then just shortly afterwards, there was a Yandex leak, right? Which also meant, that, okay, hacktivists are going after Russian companies, but there's also like a lot of customer data involved, and those customers, they are just ordinary citizens. So there's a collateral damage here. And we also tried to verify that leak, and it turned out that there were not only like Yandex emails and data in the leak, but also very random emails like from Gmail and other services. So I definitely remember the rush at the beginning of the war, because there's been a surge of leaks, and half of them proved to be fake. Some were not important, right? Some had some truth to them. So that was definitely the most interesting thing probably this year we had to do.
Yeah. And I guess with those ones, especially where it's hacktivists, right? Because when you think of data leaks, you think of these well-funded, well-organized kind of APT groups or others that, are able to maintain persistence for a while and kind of exfiltrate data. But whereas activists and these, especially with the war in Ukraine, a lot of these were kind of volunteers who haven't done that much before. How are they able to still kind of steal that much amount of data, like where the leaks were true?
Yeah, but then in many of those cases, they don't really steal that data. So there's already so much data out there, right? On the dark web, you don't even have to buy some of it. It's just basically up there for free. So there are a lot of databases out there already, and there's a lot of data to play with, right? So
Mm.
some of them prove to be just some old leaks or basically some scraped data because big companies still allow, well, not maybe allow, that's too strong a word, but don't do enough to prevent data scraping, right? So there's a lot of information you can get by, I don't know, using bots, right? But a lot of those leaks were actually like old leaks and maybe, stolen by someone else and hacktivists just being very public about it. There were some, what it seemed, new data leaks, but then they were mostly about, very niche Russian companies, and maybe not of that big of an interest to the public, right?
I mean, that raises some interesting points, especially around kind of the life cycle of breached data, right? So, kind of you mentioned that these may have been past leaks, which were then made public. But if they're past leaks, they're probably then being already used by kind of cyber criminals before they get made public. So, I guess generally, how long does it normally take for a breach to occur before it gets public in your experience?
Well, it depends, but to my view, once the data is out there for free, there's not much use to it for the person who stole it, right? So basically, I feel like it's maybe just leftovers. Of course, it depends on the data, right? And with something like I don't know, Facebook scrape, right? So there's nothing else to do but to kind of sell it, and then many different threat actors can use it for phishing and other attacks. But with the more serious data leaks, I think we don't really see them, right? If a threat actor, a motivated one, maybe a persistent one, steals some documents and some internal data from, I don't know, government agency or big company, if it's like intellectual property and whatnot. I think, we won't see it public. If they have that data, they are going to use it for their own nefarious purposes rather than just put them up for sale, right?
And let's talk a bit about some of the outside factors that have influenced data leaks. And you mentioned earlier the Ukraine war. Are there any others you can think of, maybe the pandemic or others that have influenced how data leaks are rising these days?
Well, yeah, of course, the pandemic, because online retail boomed, right? And we just got used to buying stuff online. Even those people who couldn't imagine themselves, buying something online, now they're buying groceries and Christmas presents and books and whatnot. And also, the shift to remote work, I think, had a huge influence here. So now there are so many more opportunities for threat actors to phish us, right, and to penetrate the corporate environment because we do everything online and we have so many Internet of Things devices, right?
Hmm.
And so basically, cybercrime is linked to data leaks, whether it's just the leak of your credentials, banking, health information, or data as a result of ransomware. All cybercrime, to my understanding, is about data, whether it's espionage or credential theft or whatnot. So,
Okay.
because data is power and therefore money, so yeah.
Bot attacks are becoming more frequent, more time-consuming to stop, and cause untold damage to your brand. Thankfully, Netacea agentless bot management detects up to 6 times more threats and stops bots automatically. Block more bad bots. Go to netacea.com.
And what about stuff like, I mean, especially in Europe, the GDPR and regulations like that? How has that affected businesses taking data security?
GDPR has definitely improved our privacy rights, right? At least now we have this notion that privacy is our right. It's something that we have a right to. And I tend to believe that small businesses are actually trying to do their best to protect our data since they probably can't really afford hefty fines, right? But then what about big tech? Because just a couple of days ago, I looked, at the GDPR fines here in Europe. And guess what? Amazon, Google, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, they all got record high fines for GDPR violations, right? So
Mm.
you would imagine that big companies with huge departments, and resources to, have people on board to read those documents, to put all the protections in place. So you would think that, they shouldn't find themselves in such a situation. So my question here is have they really stopped stockpiling our information or not, right? So I highly doubt that. So I think, GDPR to some extent it's better, but whether it is tackling the biggest problem that we have with like big tech and our data, so I'm not sure about that one.
Mm. And I mean, you mentioned earlier around some of the groups faking that they have data or being very public about data leaks to kind of extort their victims. How do you feel that kind of GDPR has played into that, right? Because at one point, if a threat actor goes to you, look, we've got this data and we will make this public unless you pay us. If you pay us, we won't make this public, then you don't have to report your GDPR breach. Do you think that's had an impact?
Well, it's hard to say, I don't have any statistics, but I definitely saw quite some ransom notes where ransom gangs, they know that, companies might violate GDPR if that leak or that ransom case goes public. And, so they would threaten those companies with GDPR, saying that, okay, guys, if you don't pay us, we will, report this case to authorities, and then you'll face a fine, which might be way higher than our ransom demand. So GDPR definitely plays a role here.
Yeah, I mean, these criminals are quite clever in how they try and extort, kind of use whatever levers they can pull. Touching a little bit more on ransomware, and in particular double extortion ransomware, where the threat actor is going to not only encrypt data but also exfiltrate it and use that as a second kind of extortion lever. How have you seen ransom demand and the response to them change in recent years?
Well, no, at least it seems a bit more quiet maybe after the colonial pipeline, and all the like increased attention. We still see big brands listed on gangs' websites. Ferrari, IKEA, Continental, many colleges, higher education institutions, healthcare institutions, definitely. But it seems that ransom demands are not breaking records anymore. What we actually noticed from our own investigations and our own research is that criminals actually use bots to find open databases, and they ask for quite a modest amount of ransom, I think, to maybe make sure they are paid and law enforcement doesn't get involved. So in one of our recent investigations, we actually found a threat actor asking only for $200 ransom, and we were able to verify that, at least five victims actually paid that amount. So five is only what we know that that threat actor might have, way more wallet addresses. So it seems that those criminals are kind of diversifying their risks, going after smaller targets, being a bit more quiet about it, right? Because a company probably would decide to pay if the amount is only like $200 or even 2,000, right? It's not worth to call the law enforcement. I know companies don't want law enforcement to get involved too. So, at least that's what we have observed.
Yeah, I guess the key thing with an extortion demand has got to be something that the company can actually pay. And also, if you keep it quite low, you kind of reduce attention being brought to yourself. You don't bring the kind of law enforcement into it, then it's easier on you. But I guess also with kind of a $200 ransom, you've got to be spreading yourself quite wide to actually start making some profit on that, right? 'Cause
Well, I don't know how many databases they actually managed to encrypt, right? So another investigation we did last year, it showed that there are like tens of thousands databases left open there, right? So,
hmm,
imagine a bot just going all over them, encrypting them, and just getting all the $200 from each of the company. But then also we have to have in mind that ransomware is a service now, so you don't really need to be very skilled, right? A lot of
hmm.
rookies, basically people without big tech knowledge, go out there, ransom, ransomware, and then, they can go out there and play with it. I mean, it's not that complicated anymore. So,
I think that's a general trend we're seeing in cybersecurity, right? Just whether it's ransomware or even bot attacks, everything is becoming easier to do this kind of cybercrime as a service. It's really exploding.
I also just wanted to add that, you might think, oh, 200, that's a, funny amount. But then I read a report which said that those rookies who just start their cyber criminal career, so they can earn up to $20,000 a month. So if you are only getting started and buying stuff off the shelf, and
Yeah.
when you become a cyber kingpin, so the report said that you can earn as much as $600,000. And I'm not advertising it, but as I said, $200 might seem funny, but it all adds up, and then you get, like, being a rookie, $20,000 a month. So something to think about, I guess.
Yeah. Let's talk about what happens when the criminals get caught, because you mentioned Colonial Pipeline, and that's an example of where there was a big kind of law enforcement action there. But is that generally the case where you have mass data theft, or is it kind of rare?
Yeah, in many cases, the mass data theft is associated basically with ransomware gangs, right? They exfiltrate data, they encrypt it, and they also blackmail companies, right? So we don't see that many arrests, at least not to the extent of the cybercrime, and would definitely like to see more people getting arrested, but it's not that easy. People, it's kind of easy for cyber criminals to hide. But just recently, Canadian authorities arrested Russian national suspect of having ties with the notorious Logbit ransomware cartel, right? And we
Mm.
also, just a while ago, we saw some lapsus arrests. So again, that's not directly, they were not arrested because of theft of data, right? But ransomware, but it's inextricably linked, because, as I said, ransomware is also all about the data and what you can do with it, and what's it worth. So there are some arrests, there are some good signs, I guess.
And once the criminal group has the data, you said data is power. What are some of the ways that this has been or can be exploited?
Well, again, it depends on the data, right? So simple sets of phone numbers and emails, they are used for phishing, right? And business email compromise is such a big problem for companies, and it costs billions in losses worldwide, right?
Mhm.
In some of the more extreme cases, for example, Optus hack in Australia, right? So a threat actor basically stole passport numbers, and then driving license data. So basically, people's identities, right? And the government ordered the company to pay for the replacement of victims' IDs, right? That's one of the extreme cases, right? Well, data theft can also result in supply chain, have collateral damage, right? And basically hurt third parties because the data that you have on your server, your computer, it's not only your data, right? Let's be fair. It's also whether your employee data is out there, also your customer data, your client data, your provider data, and whatnot. So, the collateral damage might be huge. And in some cases, it is huge. We saw that with SolarWinds, Cassia hack a while ago. And, in some cases, as we already talked about it, criminals don't even extort the data. They just find that open database data is out there for grabs, and they just lock that data and, ask for a ransom. Cyber criminals can steal your identity, steal your money, and, it can also lead to reputational damage and whatnot. It can be the whole domino effect. I mean, it depends on the data, but it's really serious.
And I mean, especially considering you mentioned stuff like identity theft, right? That can have such an impact on kind of an individual. So should people be worried if they see that a company they're a customer of has been a victim of a data leak? And what can we as consumers do to protect ourselves from harm if our data is leaked?
Well, worry will get you nowhere, right? Of course, we should be worried, but we should just assume that our data is out there, and it's not realistic, to think that we are safe because so many companies, so many third parties sit on our data, right? And there's basically nothing you can really do about it because none of the companies are immune to hacking, and so our data is not safe. So what we can do basically is to look at how much data we share with those companies. So, we should never share excessive data with any company. Or for that matter, just maybe put it publicly right out there. So just limit the location data, the contact data that you share with Facebook and other social media companies and whatnot. Also, one of the advices I truly believe in is just do not reuse your password because your password can be hacked, even if that's a like really strong one. But it still can be hacked by a persistent, advanced threat actor. So just make sure that if one company has been hacked, the threat actor won't hack into your other accounts using the same credentials, so that let's try and keep that damage to a minimum. Then also, I found myself that multi-factor authentication helps in so many cases. So go ahead and enable that on every account, every app you use, and, monitoring also your banking data, credit cards is always good because, well, basically scammers are simply on the loose, right? So I also would suggest just go to any data leak checker, check if your data has been leaked. I'm sure it has been leaked, so just go and check whether you need to enforce some stronger security on any of your accounts, change passwords, and whatnot. So yes, we should be worried, but we also should try and take the matters into our own hands because we can, just at least to some extent, protect ourselves. Right? Just be smart about it.
Those are some really great tips, and I'll just second the have unique passwords for every account. I mean, one of the things we deal with at Netacea a lot is credential stuffing, and that exists as an attack purely because people reuse passwords. And yeah, kind of if you use separate passwords for every account, that's a great help. Before we close out, Jurgita, and thank you so much for kind of sharing your insights with us. Do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
Well, I could talk and talk about data leaks, but I just it's my goal to. I want people to be interested in this. I know that we all tend to think, okay, that I'm too small. I'm of no interest to anyone. So why would someone hack me? But then a lot of criminals, they're opportunistic, right? And they
Mm.
don't exactly pick their targets. They just kind of do the mass phishing, the massive mass attacks, and then they see who falls for it. And also we might open back doors to our companies, right, to the corporations we work for, and then it might have that collateral damage that I talked about, right?
Mhm.
So every one of us is on the hacker's radar, so we definitely need to take this seriously, right?
Well, thank you so much, Jurgita, for sharing your time with us. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning into this episode of Cybersecurity Sessions. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and like or leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. We'd love to get your feedback. You can also get in touch with us via our Twitter, that's @CybersecPod, or by email to podcast@netacea.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next month.
Experiencing bot attacks but don't know who's attacking? You need a bespoke threat insights report from Netacea's threat intelligence experts to break down how you're being attacked and advise on how to reduce bot attack risk. Visit netacea.com/threat insights for more.